So bunch of wild updates for you guys in terms of what's going on in Chicago, Portland, court cases, National Guard deployment, MEAL Team 6. We'll get to that in a moment as well. But let's start with this. C1, Trump threatening both the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, and Governor Pritzker. Chicago mayor should be in jail for failing to protect ICE officers. Governor Pritzker as well. Love when the President of the United States threatens his political opponents with imprisonment. Let's go ahead and take a listen to J.B. Pritzker's response.
I want to hear what you have to say back to the President of the United States.
Well, let's start with the idea that this is a convicted felon. I mean, think about that, who is threatening to jail me. I got to say, this guy's unhinged. He's insecure. He's a wannabe dictator. And there's one thing I really want to say to Donald Trump. If you come for my people, you come through me. So come and get me.
Come and get me. So Pritzker trying to take a page, I think, out of the Gavin Newsom playbook of, hey, I'm going to stand up to you. I'm not going to buckle in the face of what you're trying to do to the city of Chicago. Certainly Chicago residents and many others in Illinois and many across the country, frankly, stand with him on that. There's also what appears to be a pretty significant decision yesterday coming out of a federal court in Chicago. I'm going to do my best to explain this. I spent a lot of time yesterday digging into the significance of this and what it's going to mean. Let's go ahead and put this element up on the screen. So a federal judge in Chicago has found that ICE has repeatedly violated a consent decree that applies to Chicago and a number of adjacent regions over warrantless arrests. Okay, so going back a number of years, there was a finding that it appeared ICE was violating immigrants' rights in and around Chicago. And so the government entered into this consent decree to make sure there were increased reporting requirements, to make sure that they are meeting their requirements of using warrants when required in order to arrest immigrants who are expected of being in the country illegally. So the lawyers for the plaintiffs here came in and said, look, it does not look like you're complying with this whatsoever. And this judge agreed. So what is the legal landscape? Basically, in the wake of the Supreme Court saying that you can do these like racial profiling, Kavanaugh stops that we've been talking about, you're allowed to briefly question someone based on basically just like their appearance, the fact they're in an area where there's a lot of undocumented immigrants, where they're working, whatever. You're allowed to briefly question them. But if you want to actually arrest them, you have to have some sort of a warrant. And you have to prove that not only do you have probable suspicion that they are in the country illegally, but also that you suspect that they would be a flight risk. This has to be documented. So as we've seen in Chicago in any number of cases, you know, they actually carry around these blank warrants in their pocket. This was something the judge took great issue with, that it was like if they're in the process of apprehending someone else and there happens to be what they call collateral arrests that are made, they'll just pull out one of these blank warrants, fill it out, and use that as their warrant. In other instances, they didn't use warrants whatsoever. So the judge found that in these instances specifically that were brought to their attention, I think there were 22 different cases, including some that were noted in the news previously, that they violated that consent decree, they violated their rights, that those individuals have to be released. And they're also asking for more information about other instances in which this occurred. So most directly, this applies to Chicago and the surrounding areas that were subject to this consent decree, but the consent decree also required had some stipulations with regard to national enforcement as well. So it is a significant development. We'll see what the enforcement looks like. We'll see whether ICE complies with it. We'll see if they change the way that they conduct themselves going forward. But Saagar, one of the major incidents that they cited in this lawsuit and in this finding was that apartment raid where people, they just went in with no warrants and pulled people out of their apartments, whether they were citizens, not citizens, et cetera.
Yeah, I was curious, and since you've done the research, I read that Block Chicago article. What I don't understand is how a consent decree can be confined only to an area for national law enforcement. That's why I was like, isn't it a national standard for warrants or for, why do you have to conduct yourself differently in the city of Chicago than, let's say, the state of California or the state of Illinois? Like, how it just didn't click for me.
Yeah.
That's what I was trying to understand.
I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Good. All right. Because that's why I've asked ChatGPT. Even they are like, well, there was a consent decree in the past, and this is 2022. It was under the Biden administration. Technically, they don't have to apply or they can comply, but they can appeal. There's a supremacy argument here about, hey, like you can't restrict like federal law enforcement action in one particular area because it should be a national standard. It's governed by federal court.
Yeah.
So that's why I was like, what?
And the national standard is, as I described, the Kavanaugh stop is not a justification for arrest.
Yes, that's right. It's a brief detention, or
supposed to be
detention for, what is it, a reasonable period of time.
It's not even detention. It's supposed to be like you can approach someone on the street and question them about their immigration status. Now, ICE has been stretching that in all sorts of ways, and even what constitute arrest is something that has to be sort of litigated, that there's, Supreme Court precedent about, et cetera. Yeah. And the idea is that a reasonable person would think that you were not able to freely leave is the definition of what constitutes an arrest. Something like that is basically the language. What I read is that basically the consent decree allowed ICE to, agree to these changes, but didn't admit liability. It applies to arrests in the 7-county Chicago metro area, but includes nationwide policy changes for ICE's warrantless arrest practices. So that's why, it's enforced in Chicago. It has the most bearing on what's going on in Chicago right now, but also does implicate national policy and could act as some sort of a constraint. Again, we've seen, though, the way that some of these decisions end up getting overturned on appeal, or the initial temporary restraining order, those sorts of things get rolled back on appeal. Second of all, we've seen the way that this government has found sneaky ways to avoid complying with, these sorts of decisions. So we'll see if it changes their behavior, but it's the most significant lawsuit to date that could constrain the way that they operate, where they just roll into an apartment building, for example, with Black Hawk military helicopters and pull everybody up, or go to a park and see a family that's there. That's one of the instances that was involved in this case as well, and just decide to arrest the mom, dad, and 5-year-old daughter who happened to be there. So they wouldn't be able to do that without being able to show, not only do we think you're undocumented, but we think you're a flight risk before this could be adjudicated.
Okay. I'm curious to see how it goes on appeal. Again, I don't quite understand. Are you saying, or based on your research, do you think it could go federal? Like it would apply everywhere? Yeah,
I think it could. I mean, the standards should apply everywhere. The standards I just laid out are the national law. With regard to Chicago, I think they had some additional reporting requirements and additional burdens to, ensure that they were complying with what the law is basically my understanding.
Okay. I still am just unclear because I don't really understand how. I don't understand how it can be practiced in one place from the Supreme Court and then not in Chicago. I apologize. It's just so confusing.
The overlap is confusing. So in Chicago, even in the face of this decision, they can still do the Kavanaugh stops.
Yes.
The question is not about that. It's about when you take it to the next step and you actually arrest and detain someone. Yeah. And again, this is law that applies across the land. In Chicago, I think because of the consent decree, they had some sort of additional tools to be able to get this particular decision. But it should apply more broadly. And even in the consent decree, yes, they had some specific Chicago steps, but it also implicated nationwide ICE policy changes to make sure that immigrants' rights were being preserved. Okay. That's my understanding.
All right. Everyone I know it's tedious, but I think, as you said, we did the research because you said it was the most significant one to date, so we'll continue to track it. Should we update everyone on Meal Team 6?
Go ahead, Saagar.
No, this is yours.
This is me?
Yeah,
okay, all right. Well,
you made the TikTok. You're the star.
I did. Yeah. I did make a TikTok. I was inspired to do my most TikTok yet about this particular development. So Texas National Guard has now been deployed into Chicago, which is very scary that you have now red state soldiers being deployed in blue state, seems to be courting dangerous escalation, et cetera. However, it's a little bit hard to take the fascist threat seriously when this is what the fascist threat looks like. Let's put this up on the screen. Many comments were made. They're being called Meal Team 6. Mm-hmm. They're being called the Gravy Seals. Mm-hmm. I've heard people say that they're arriving for Operation Desert Storm, among other discussions of maybe you need to make sure to protect that deep dish pizza in Chicago. that
or those dipped subs, whatever those are.
for those who are just listening, there's some big boys here. In particular, the two gentlemen in the front, but they're all pretty.
They're hefty.
They're all
no
looking
disrespect.
like a typical American, I guess.
No disrespect. Yeah, you're right.
Typical Texan in particular.
Very
Texas has some big boys down there.
Representative. Yeah, I mean, this kind of gets to our discussion in the last show, and I was like, look, I get it. I know, we can rhetorically say a lot of things. We are talking about 200 National Guardsmen. I'm not saying it's not extraordinary to deploy. And also, when the image of something like this comes out, or it recalls the military parade, where people can't even march out of step. So let's also live a little bit.
Well, that's the thing. Even our fascism is so embarrassing at this point.
This is to my point
humiliating
about the rhetoric.
This is what it looks like.
This is just like there's a difference, right? You could say something is fascistic or something like that as opposed to, quote, fascism, but whatever. My only general point around this is let's all, be a little clear about what's actually happening with the deployment of the Texas National Guardsmen. It is also pretty ironic in the wake of Mr. Hegseth, Pete Hegseth's secretary, lecturing the generals, which I think is fine, about being fat. But it's like, guys, then at the same time, you can't be talking about, what do they say, our elite National Guardsmen. And then this is what the book looks like. It's elite. It's not a good look.
Yeah, there was
not a good
Greg Abbott put out a tweet. Texas governor saying, our elite Texas National Guardsmen are going to be on the ground at any moment.
I will say, look, it is very representative of the Trump coalition of the state of Texas as well. Is a lot of lower income, statistically most likely to be morbidly obese and Hispanic. So that is the new coalition here. It reminds me of some of the Spider-Man memes that came out of Los Angeles, where it was like some guy named Ramirez who was the National Guardsman pointing at the cop named Ramirez, pointing at the illegal also named Ramirez, and the three of them are like this. So that is America in a certain sense.
Well, I will make the point that Ken Klippenstein has been making, which is, look, I think that when you are normalizing military on our streets, I think that's a scary thing. And especially when you are taking red states and, invading blue states. And you are playing with fire here. I will also say the National Guard has been and is legally limited in what they are able to do. So
especially under the current deployment.
Posse Comitatus Act does apply as long as this is, so far we haven't had the Insurrection Act, implemented or whatever by Trump. So you don't have under that the laws and what they could do would be different. So that's worth keeping in mind as well. But they are somewhat limited, which is why, here in DC, there's a lot of them like standing around.
I don't see them anymore. I haven't seen nearly as many anymore.
Yeah.
I hear they're all just down by the National Mall.
Really, they're just like chilling by the National Mall. And they did a lot of like trash pickup.
I know. I feel bad for them because a lot of them, they left work. They got called up.
Yeah, I mean, this is, and that's the other thing
is like, it's 12 hours a day. You have to deal with these idiot tourists and the homeless.
I have very little sympathy for the Texas big boys that we just showed you, because usually my understanding is that they will, for a mission like this, they'll ask people to volunteer. So like these dudes probably signed up to do this. So I've no
but they may have signed up for the money, right? Because
maybe,
can we really
but still, it's still a choice. You're still making a choice here. But for like the guys that they're calling up in California, they're part of the California National Guard. Yeah, these are people who this is a part-time gig, supposed to be on the weekends. They're being taken away from whatever their normal life is and their family and their normal job, et cetera, to be sent in to do what? Stand around and, assist ICE, which is part of what they're doing, and then like not a lot else, just sort of like a theatrical show. And the entities that you need to worry about more that have done more of the, extraordinary, illegal, and aggressive tactics are ICE and the federal, FBI and federal agencies that have been involved. Yesterday, I broke down the case of this woman who was shot 5 times. That was by, I believe, CBP. The Black Hawk helicopters coming in the apartment buildings, zip tying kids, like all of those sorts of things. That is where more of the action is going to be, at least now in the pre-Insurrection Act phase. We should say Trump has floated potentially implementing the Insurrection Act as well, which again would expand what the National Guard is able to do in these various places. There was a big roundtable, big Antifa roundtable yesterday, where many interesting things were said, including Trump saying that he is, that they're ending free speech. So let's go ahead and take a listen to some of what was said at that event.
Fighting crime is more than just getting the bad guy off the streets. It's breaking down the organization brick by brick. Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom.
A flag burning mob, and we've made it 1 year penalty for inciting riots. We took the freedom of speech away because that's been through the courts, and the court said you have freedom of speech. But
one of the individuals we arrested recently in Portland was the girlfriend of one of the founders of Antifa, and that we are hoping that as we go after her, interview her, and prosecute her, we will get more and more information about the network and how we can root them out and eliminate them from the existence of American society.
So I think that was a perfect mashup, Saagar, to show the tension between the clownishness and the threat of the Trump administration. You start with Pam Bondi saying that we're going to treat Antifa like the cartels. Well, what are they doing to the cartels right now? They're randomly blowing up boats that they claim are drug traffickers. By the way, the president of Colombia just came out and said, hey, one of those boats you blew up, that wasn't even Venezuela's. That was Colombian nationals. So in any case, you know, that combined with reporting from Ken about the national security memo, about the way that they are targeting anyone who is left of center at all as political opposition. There was mention made in this meeting as well as DSA, Democratic Socialists of America. This is like, you know, Zoran and a bunch of tens of thousands of people nationwide are members of the DSA, that they are deeply linked to Antifa. So painting them like this is some sort of a terror network, et cetera. Very dangerous stuff, and backed by a federal government that can and has already acted on some of this. And then you have, you know, at the end there, Kristi Noem talking about how they arrested one of the girlfriend of one of the founders of Antifa, which is just like not even a thing, completely buffoonish stuff. And in the middle, you've got Trump saying, quote unquote, we took the freedom of speech away. So you kind of got it all in that little mashup.
Yeah, that's look. I think that's generally well said. It's beclowning, as I might famously often say here on the show, and that is part of what I always wish to contextualize it. And I don't blame a lot of people for freaking out. Like if the president says, I'm going to target you, yeah, you should be worried. Like at the end of the day, the government, they can make your life hell, and they have made some people's life hell. In general, though, there's no Antifa or whatever or any of that has been extraordinary or some deployment so far of some NSPM 7, which Ken has talked about. From what I know, there is no, quote, founder of Antifa. I welcome their release of any information on that and for proof that it is some organized terror network or whatever. But this just gets back to all of the endless discussion post Charlie Kirk. Antifa, at least from my observation, doesn't seem to be some top-down organized force. It's mostly like gaming liberals or whatever on Telegram or WhatsApp who are like, hey, we're all going to come out and, you know, throw some shit on Thursday. I don't really know how organized that is per se. I guess there's some level of organization, but it's not, I guess, you know, some Al-Qaeda type cell that they're necessarily describing. I mean, look, if you are organizing genuine violence, that actually is a crime, but that's a little bit different than the way that they're talking about it here. Look, they're posturing and trying. There is so much demand from a lot of the right wing after the Charlie Kirk assassination to say, we need to treat this like an organized attempt. There is yet to be any evidence that that is the case, at least for Tyler Robinson. By the way, it's been almost, 3 weeks? We have gotten zero update
Crazy how much has
of Tyler Robinson. Yeah, exactly. They really should come out and release some more information on that. And if there was an organization, it's totally legitimate to say. But that's largely what they are responding to with this roundtable, I guess, of Antifa experts.
Well, should we show everybody the army of Antifa that Kristi Noem was facing down in Chicago? Put C5 up on the screen. So influencer Benny Johnson went and said, Kristi Noem stares down an army of Antifa and a guy in a chicken suit from the rooftop of the ICE facility here. That's the army of Antifa. Mostly, if you look closely, I think there are more people like journalists with cameras than there are
I can't tell in that second
actually
image, but in the
protesters.
first image,
There's
you
like
could definitely see
a handful of people there and a guy in a chicken suit. That's who they're calling an army of Antifa. By the way, news just came out that prior to Trump's attempt to federalize the National Guard and send them into Portland, a federal report came out, like within the Trump administration, calling the Portland anti-ICE protests outside of that building, quote unquote, low energy. So even their own internal documents said that there's not a lot going on here, which is why the federal district judge appointed by Trump in Portland said you do not have justification here to send in the National Guard. So that's worth having that context and given everything that they're doing and justifying by, these army of Antifa rhetoric and war-ravaged Portland, et cetera. This was also something we've been tracking, Saagar. C6 up on the screen. So this couple had been arrested in Chicago as, assaulting law enforcement there. And this couple had been held up, in a lot of instances by the government as, examples of the type of violence that law enforcement is facing from protesters and activists on the ground. You now have a grand jury that declined to indict both of those Chicago area ICE protesters, reminiscent of the situation here with the sandwich guy who threw a sandwich at, I don't know, a cop or FBI or somebody who was here in DC. And grand jury also said, no, we're not gonna indict this guy. This is extraordinarily unusual. Usually prosecutors, they always get their indictments. And I've forgotten the numbers, but Washington Post did an analysis, and it's the tiniest proportion.
Oh, yeah. We remember there's the famous thing you get at a grand jury.
Indict a
ham sandwich.
Indict a ham sandwich.
Famously, sandwich guy was not indicted. I have some of the details, kind of interesting. It says that Collins and Robdello were in a crowd of protesters September 27th at a facility in Broadview, Illinois. In an affidavit, authorities alleged that he had, quote, pushed back agents who were trying to push back the crowd, and agents detained her after seeing a gun at her waist. Collins, who saw the struggle, charged forward, yelling at agents to get away from his wife, and the thumb of an agent was injured in the scuffle, according to the affidavit. They said in an interview that she was coming to his partner's aid after agents grabbed her and threw her against the wall. Both defendants were legally carrying guns but did not use or brandish them. And they said it was notable that the grand jury likely had members on both sides of the political divide and still decided not to indict. So that's just the circumstance here. I guess the gun being one.
Well,
hey, 2A. It's good for the 2A.
You're allowed.
Good for our 2A community.
And Chicago is obviously liberal. It's not as liberal as DC. So to have a grand jury, Chicago area grand jury say, no, we're not going to indict these two individuals, definitely significant. People have also been taking a look at this. Let's put C7 up on the screen. This images of a pastor who's just standing there doing really nothing and gets shot in the head with this, I guess, like a pepper ball. You can see the white smoke come up, and then he drops to the ground. I don't know if this is the same guy or a different religious figure who's getting sprayed in the face with pepper spray. Another image that went viral. Tricia McLaughlin, DHS spokesperson, addressed that video that we showed you first. You can put this up on the screen. She says that footage is from almost a month ago. It just went viral now, but apparently happened a month ago. What this clip video doesn't show is that these agitators were blocking an ICE vehicle from leaving the federal facility, impeding operations over and over again. Law enforcement ordered these agitators to move off federal property so the vehicle could move. Law enforcement verbally warned them they would use force if they did not move and stop impeding operations. They did not comply. Shortly after, rioters began throwing rocks, bottles, and launching fireworks at the law enforcement officers on the roof. So TLDR is not denying that it happened. There is a longer version of the video that I've seen. It does not appear that this pastor he was actually standing in a parking space, so he wasn't blocking anyone from entering or exiting the ICE facility. But there's a separate lawsuit going on concerning their sort of like indiscriminate use of these, pepper balls and pepper spray on crowds. CPD, Chicago Police Department, was accidentally pepper sprayed. You had an elementary school that had to stay inside because of pepper spray, sort of indiscriminately just deployed in the neighborhood. So this is becoming quite a contentious piece as well.
It's a bad image. I mean, there's, anytime you start pepper spraying priests, or not priests, sorry, pastors or any of that, doesn't look good. Not going to deny it whatsoever. It's one of those which is the more that the left gets their civil rights analogies, the more it's going to be able to take off. And this is part of the reason why there's a lot of people on the right who want to criticize some of the way that ICE behaves. But I keep bringing it back to the fact that people who voted in 2024 wanted law and order specifically at the border. And when deportation, the envisionment of, quote, mass deportation was not necessarily one of which we are viewing right now. This is Trumpian and unique in a sense that genuinely is divorced from a lot of people's conceptions. You could say they should have known, etc. I really don't agree with that actually at all, because if you look specifically, not only at the rhetoric around criminals, illegals, etc., or even around the idea of deportation itself, it is one thing to say that it should happen in a serious and a well-ordered fashion, and then it's another kind of in this content brain area that we have arrived at today. And I think that's the part where a lot of people rightfully will look at that and just be like, look, I can agree intellectually, emotionally, morally with the idea of mass deportation, which I do, especially for people who arrived here illegally. I also do think there is something very grotesque about like turning it into content, as in with what they did with the Theo Von clip. We have this one as well, C10. Can we show everybody, for example? So here you have a video, right, where so you got ICE chasing some guys into a storefront. But what's noteworthy is the guy in the background with a full mounted, what is that? That's like a DSLR camera, right? Like this literally looks like almost like a rig of a Twitch streamer or something who is accompanying them. Now, listen, I am very supportive of body cam footage and all that. I think it's very important to, to keep cops accountable. And I'm assuming some of this will be available to FOIA eventually, at least sometime in the future. So it's not a bad thing for them to be documenting what they are doing. But considering the social media strategy that is now currently happening, I don't know. I mean, I don't think it is working in their favor. Look, I could be wrong, and this is what I hear. Like, you're a squish, you're an idiot, you're not doing, you don't understand, what it takes and all that. I said, maybe, I'm not the person who won the election or anything like that, but I don't necessarily think that even people who agree with genuine, look, I mean, there's quandaries, right? Like you can accept the fact that people who came here illegally are going to be deported, and you can be okay with that. There is just, to me, another thing about filming it and turning it into like video game style content. Or remember the memes, like the Studio Ghibli memes and others that they were using from chat? I go, okay, I just think that's a little bit gross, in my opinion, personally.
Yeah,
that's just me.
The ASMR deportation videos.
That's like, is that
weird,
really,
content.
It's just weird. Like it's one of those where, do we revel? Do we enjoy doing this? Because the way it was sold, it's like, look, it's a tragedy. This is one that the left created. I think that's correct. And yet, to seriously address it, we'll take this, this, and this. That doesn't deny that you have journalists or others, people who are going to be filming this. But it just seems to me very different to have you filming it yourself, turning it into meme. Like the Theo Von thing, to me, is just like so insane. Like they used his likeness and image in a DHS video where, what did he say exactly? He was like, bye or something. He didn't even know what he was saying. Somebody thrust a camera or whatever into his face. They turned it into something from the official Department of Homeland Security account. And then in his response, he was like, yo, you guys are just using this. He's like, somebody could come and kill me. He was like, I don't even know the Ring password to my camera or something. Yeah. He had never considered that, right? I really, that's where things
also
really seem to go in a bad
strategically, like if you accept, and I do accept, that these guys, the Theo Vons, et cetera, were an important part, not determinative, but important part of why they won. Yeah. And then how tone deaf to go out of your way to like piss this person off, and I feel like as a human, you would then be sort of like incentivized to distance yourself. Like, I have nothing to do with, like, this is not, this is not something I support. I think his dad immigrated from Nicaragua, something he's very proud of, and so he's like, I don't want to be associated with this. And so it is giving a little bit of like the IDF soldiers filming their war crimes, because the reason they did that was not, it was because there was a domestic audience for it. Like inside of Israel, these guys were getting praised and getting support for, these horrors that they're putting out there. And, now I was seeing some stats, Saagar, that Twitter, which used to be dominated by Democrats, now dominated by Republicans. Not that that would be any surprise, but I do think that some of this is a result of being inside of this media bubble, where you think that this, based ritual or the vice signaling or whatever, that this lands with the general population in a way that it really doesn't. So you've got that dynamic. The dynamic you were touching on before, too, I think is a really important one, which you are absolutely right. People want things to feel safe, calm, orderly. Like they do want that law and order sense. There's no doubt about it. And so what the Trump administration is flirting with here, if not has already crossed the threshold, is to make it appear very much like they are the chaos agents, like they are the ones bringing tumult into your communities. If you look at, if you look at Chicago, I think in Portland it's even more clear. Crime rate was way down. These protests had really died out. There were, maybe a dozen or so people who were routinely outside of the ICE facility, et cetera. Now you have all of this tumult after the Trump administration comes in and tries to sort of like stoke the flames. So when you combine that with also the increasing understanding that these actions are not just impacting undocumented immigrants, they're impacting American citizens as well, whose rights are being directly violated, you start to get on the wrong side of a political equation. As I told you before, my fear is that they don't really care. You feel like they just have miscalculated here. I acknowledge is completely possible, but I don't think that these. What do I know? But I don't think that most people, even people who are in favor of a larger scale deportation than I am, are enjoying the images of like little kids zip tied together.
I have no idea. Okay, I have no idea, and I can't speak to everybody's motivation. Only, general political analysis. To the law and order point, this is one which is very important. And we kind of thought about one of the reasons why I don't think there was as much backlash on LA is you had guys with Mexican flags on top of burning cars. And guess what? That's going to go viral everywhere. In terms of Portland or Chicago, have not yet seen that type of imagery or large scale blocking a highway in major response, similar to the Antifa or the BLM protests of 2017 all the way through 2020, which Portland in particular was like an epicenter for quite a bit of that.
Yeah.
And also, one of the things I personally have had to grapple with is that people who live in some of these cities just accept a shitload more crime than I ever would. I will never understand it. I don't know why it's cool to have fentanyl-leaning people everywhere, but that seems to be the acceptance that a lot of them want, and they would rather have that than somebody actually do anything about it or feel virtuous. I guess, it's your city. You can do what you want, but that is another kind of locality where you're rubbing up against. Like here in D.C., I think the crime was out of control. I think it was absolutely out of control. Some new statistics just came out actually showing that the cops were cooking the books. It's not a secret. I've lived here for over 10 years. It's a shithole compared to how it used to be. But residents were broadly seemed okay with it. I was like, okay, I don't know. That's why I left. I was like, at a certain point, you'd rather have a Black Trans Lives Matter flag than you would do anything about crime. That's your decision. And to allow murder, I'm just going to leave and allow exit. But that is another thing I've been grappling with as well is there is something perverse at the same time, and we have to be guilty of this, right, is we're commenting on Portland. I don't live in Portland, right? In a certain sense, I believe in supremacy. I believe in having to guarantee people's rights. I also, though, acknowledge the city of Portland is massively liberal. They literally legalized drugs there. They finally admitted their mistake in the state of Oregon, but I visited Portland at the height of it, I think 2022. It was insane. And
it's probably the most hippie-ish city.
Yeah, no, but I'm talking about crime-wise, at night, literal rogue fentanyl addicts running around trying to check into a hotel. You have to get buzzed into the hotel. You cannot get in. I'm talking in the middle of downtown. People there just didn't seem to care. I was like, wow, I could never live this way.
I think, we should also say that this National Guard, attempting to have National Guard deployment in Portland and the increased presence of federal agents and whatever, Trump is not saying this is about crime. He's saying this is about protecting federal officer, protecting this ICE building, et cetera.
Well, it depends on the day.
But that's been the primary justification that he's been, and that is completely and totally fabricated. By their own admission, their own internal report said that the protests outside the ICE facility were low energy before they decided to show up and put snipers on the roof and all of this nonsense. So I don't like to, we shouldn't validate their narrative about what's going on because their narrative is completely and utterly false.
We gotta, it's not nice. Listen, I love Portland as a place. It's cool. It's amazing weather in the summer. It is genuinely beautiful. But they do just, again, I don't get it. Seattle, Vancouver, any of these Pacific Northwest places, they just accept a level of drug use in public, which I think is crazy. I have no idea why people put up with it or any of that. And then, of course, what the Trump administration and even the federal government wants is people like me or others who don't live there who are like, I can't believe this, right? And then there kind of interacts with the National Guard deployment, et cetera. I do think that there is something weird about it, like in general, where we pass judgment. And I do, certainly. I just said it about Portland, about San Francisco, about Los Angeles. I think all are crazy. Here in DC, Chicago, all these other folks. I don't know. I would not personally live there, given the choice. But at the same time, there is something weird, which I do acknowledge, because I'm sure that they look at our life, say, wherever we live, and they're like, well, I wouldn't want to live there either. And it's like, well, I don't necessarily want them to impose their will on me, too. I don't want them to have to come in. To the extent that I have a lot of, let's say, pushback is when I see that type of BS mentality start to bleed into, let's say, the suburbs. That's when I'm like, okay, it's time to riot. So I do get it from their perspective, and I want to validate their feelings. Like, yes, you do also get to kind of live the way that you want to. Like, if you want to live in a city with a shitload of crime and fentanyl, and I mean, okay, I don't know what to say. I guess it's your choice. It's just one that it's a permissiveness and a value structure which you've created all for yourselves. I guess you deserve it. I don't know what else to say.
I mean, I think you would understand some of it in the context of the conversations we've had about safetyism. Like where there's, I think we're seeing right now in real time with these extraordinary federal government actions in Chicago and Portland and other places, that there's a trade-off on the other side of that. So you have this sense of fear, this sense of surveillance, this lawlessness coming from the federal government, and sense of chaos being stoked by them when you do have those sorts of crackdowns. So I think, in real time, we're seeing what those trade-offs kind of look like.
I think it's totally fair. People get to, at the end of the day, get to decide for themselves. Like here in DC, it was very clear to me. I was like, these people do not care how I do about crime. I'm the problem, I guess. I don't necessarily have the right to just say the city should be the way I am. So sometimes you just got to do the responsible thing and leave. But if you want to stay and that's the way that you want to live, I also believe in the American value of like, well, maybe you should be able to live that way, right? Like if that's how you want it to be, so be it. And citizens can make up their minds for themselves. Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.